welcome to the Solid Signal podcast for January 6th, 2014. This is not only our first podcast of 2014, it's our 1-year anniversary podcast of the very first one that we did. I'm particularly proud of what I've managed to record in 2013. I think I came up with a decent amount of information, something for everybody. Most of the time, tried to keep it entertaining and relatively short, so that you're in, you're out, you have time for the rest of your day. 2014 is a new year, though, and I'll be looking forward to a whole bunch of new subjects to talk about, things to keep you entertained and informed. Now, let me first pat myself on the back, as undignified as that tends to be, and tell you that in our very first podcast, which you can find on YouTube and iTunes, the one thing that I was really most worried about in 2013 was fee fights, channel blackouts, call them what you will, but the loss of channels all over the pay TV landscape. I thought this was going to be the biggest story of 2013, and although by the mid-year point it didn't look like it was going to be, it turns out, that's right, I can't afford money for fancy sound effects, I was right. According to a fancy sounding group called the American Television Alliance, made up of the biggest pay TV providers out there, not only was 2013 the biggest year for channel blackouts, it blew every other year out of the water. In matter of fact, the number of channel blackouts in 2013 was almost the same as the number of channel blackouts in the previous 4 years combined. There were 127 channel blackouts in 2013, which is utterly, utterly amazing, especially when you realize that just 4 years ago there were 12. No, the podcast didn't go away. I just stopped there and gave you a little bit of dead air for emphasis. 12. Think about that. Think about how, all of a sudden, these content providers started jacking their prices up so high that it became impossible to pay them. That's how channel blackouts happen. Don't let anybody fool you. They happen because prices are just too high for those contracts to get signed. I mean, everybody would like it if the contracts were nice and easy to sign, if they contained a reasonable increase that everybody agreed was fair. But 300, 400%, no, that's just not going to happen. And what's the result? Channel blackouts. The most notorious, of course, was Time Warner's blackout of owned and operated CBS stations in Los Angeles, New York, Dallas, and other places that resulted in millions upon millions of people losing CBS programming in the month of August. Miraculously, things were put back to rights by the time the new television season started, but it was getting close there for a while. That was not the only channel blackout, but it was probably the most important for a lot of people. I've said before that my plan for ending these channel blackouts is simple. You just allow for mandatory arbitration like you do with sports teams. Doesn't always work for them, but it certainly works most of the time. So that if it looks like two parties are not going to reach an agreement, they enter into mandatory arbitration with the goal being no blackouts. The arbitrator decides what's fair, and both parties have to abide. Oh, sure, nobody's going to be happy about it, but on the other hand, stuff stays on the air, and more importantly, the entire industry doesn't collapse. See, this is not 1994. This is 2014, people, and there's a lot more ways to get your entertainment than there was in 1994. You have Netflix, you have Hulu, you have streaming apps. You don't even have to watch entertainment at all. You can play video games on a little tablet in your hand that weighs less than the keyboard of the computer you had in 1994. Linear television, and in other words, what we used to call plain old television, is just one bit in an increasingly crowded landscape of entertainment options that are becoming more and more enticing by the day, instead of having these petty squabbles threatening to take it down. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, content providers need to step down because they're threatening the entire model. Shockingly, it's already true that a large proportion of younger folks under the age of 35 just don't view television as a must-have entertainment experience. They'd rather be on their tablet or out with friends or on social networking. They just don't see television as the kind of quality time spent that we used to maybe when we were that age. And that means this is absolutely not the time to prove to them that television is nothing but a series of squabbles, that you can't depend on it for the programming that you want, and it's more about business than it is about taking care of people. The millennial generation is one that all of a sudden burst into our consciousness in the last year or two with the power that they've got and the idea that they reject traditional marketing and advertising schemes almost completely. And honestly, the last thing you want to do right now is get that entire generation turned off television for any reason. Content providers and pay TV companies need to work together to preserve television for the coming generations, not to destroy it. Pay TV companies are doing their part to keep prices down, but at the same time, they can't do much if content providers are asking for gigantic raises. Well, that's about all for this week's podcast. Next week, I'll be back with a review of the Consumer Electronics Show, where your Solid Signal blog team will be for 5 glorious days in the city of Las Vegas, Nevada. I'll tell you everything there was to see. In the meantime, if you're on Twitter, follow at SolidSignalCom for daily updates. I'll be posting as much as possible. And going to the blog.solidsignal.com site, Solid Signal blog, for even more updates. And have a great week.